You know, recently there's been a conversation on whether Declan Rice is worth £150 million or not. After all, he's about to enter his golden age. He's quite talented, and most importantly, his English. Maybe not as English as a pound sterling, but is English in the football world regardless. Which, I'll be honest, got me thinking, how much would Declan Rice be worth if his name was Declan Risotto? Well, I think we can all have our guesses, but let's have a comparison between Declan Rice and a non-English player that's more or less in a similar boat. Let's talk about the following scenario. On one side, we have a player like Declan Rice who's immensely talented and is about to enter his prime. He reached the final of Euro 2020 with England, and other than that, has never challenged for any major trophies in his career, and through no fault of his own, has never played in the Champions League despite his immense talent. Price tag? 100 to 150 million pounds. Now let's compare him to another player who's more or less in a similar boat, Nicola Barella, who's also immensely talented and also entering his golden years. Captain at 21 in his old club, challenged for and actually won major honors. Been playing in the Champions League for multiple years in a row and actually won the Euro 2020 with Italy against the very same Declan Rice in the final. Price tag? Around 70 to 80 million. Although, oddly enough, they're both around the same market value in Transfermarkt. But the question is, are English players overvalued? And what contributes to these insane inflation rates of English players in the market? Well, to do that, we need to discuss the first unwritten law of business. Let's talk about the first unwritten law of business, and this is the basis of any business in any industry, not just football. The buyer always wants to buy gold with the price of silver, and the seller always wants to sell silver with the price of gold. So in plain English, it just means that the buyer wants to pay less than the actual value, and the seller wants to sell more than the actual value. Don't take it personally, that's just the nature of business. Now let's take a look at the Premier League clubs. With the massive money coming in from the commercial and television deals, the Premier League clubs no longer have to sell their assets to keep afloat, unlike clubs like Barcelona or Bordeaux, and they can afford to reject the offers that they don't like from the other clubs, hence being able to sell silver for the price of gold when they see fit. On the other hand, we have so many Premier League clubs that can't afford to buy players, and if you throw in the desperation of reaching a European spot or not getting relegated, that's a recipe for English players to be overvalued, in which case, it makes buyers able to buy silver for the price of gold. Hell, with clubs like Man City or Newcastle, they can't even buy dust for the price of gold. But I digress. At the end of the day, is Declan Rice worth £150 million? Probably not. But because of what we talked about, he is worth that amount to his club, West Ham, and right now, they have the power to dictate that. And believe me, as history has shown, there will be clubs that blindly pay a massive sum without thinking about how the player fits in their project. Another factor is the homegrown rule in the Premier League, where each team needs to have at least 8 homegrown players in their 25-man squads. That means each club should have at least 8 players that spent at least 3 years until the age of 21 in the English football. It doesn't necessarily have to be a player of English nationality, as someone like Cesc Fabregas also qualifies for this rule. But it's safe to say that majority of those who spent 3 years until the age of 21 in English football are actually English players. So the need to fulfill this quota adds to the market price of these English players. In other words, the buyers are able, and in certain cases, desperate in buying silver with the price of gold. And when you have sellers that are not desperate to sell, and buyers who are desperate to buy, that's a recipe for inflation in any walk of business. And it doesn't help that after UK's Brexit, clubs are no longer able to sign foreigners until the age of 18. So cases like Cesc Fabregas and Paul Pogba wouldn't have joined their club before 18, and therefore no longer qualified as homegrown players, which obviously means that most, if not all, homegrown players are English now. But that's not the only reason, and there are also other factors in play. And before we talk about the other factors, don't forget to leave a like or comment. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm, as a lot of time goes into making these videos. I really enjoy reading your comments. Thank you for your love and support. Now, this is a personal opinion, but I also think that media's bias and sometimes protection towards the English players drives up the market value as well. Not too long ago, Harry Kane refused to come back to preseason training for Spurs and wanted to force a move. Now, I can't even imagine what would have happened if it was Paul Pogba trying to pull off a similar thing. And because it was Harry Kane, he was afforded an angle of sympathy or context from a portion of the media. And while it's not directly relevant to the transfer value, it shows a clear bias of English media towards English players. And that can have a positive effect in driving up an English player's market value. The high price of buying an English player in his prime makes it a high-risk operation, with any possible outcome of high rewards all the way to completely bust. John Stones is a perfect example of a high-risk, high-reward transfer that actually worked for him and for Manchester City. And despite some rough patches here and there, he's one of the cornerstones, pun severely intended, of Manchester City's recent success. On the other hand, Harry Maguire was the most expensive defender in the world when he transferred to United. And that hasn't exactly worked as well as everyone hoped. And I'm being very kind here. By the way, I recently made a video about Harry Maguire's case recently. Feel free to check it out, but only after this one. Talking about buying dust with the price of gold. So yeah, more often than not, these kinds of transfers can lead to mixed results. At the end of the day, as they say in the financial world, there's no such thing as a bad asset, just a bad asking price. Liverpool is a brilliant example of a club that doesn't fall into the trap of overpaying for English players, at least not in the last few years. It's been a while since they overpaid for Andy Carroll on the last day of the January window in 2011. While they have a core of English players like Henderson, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and my personal favorite, James Milner, you would rarely see them chase the likes of Declan Rice for the ungodly amount that he's been associated with, and instead try to get their needs met with the quality players who don't have the English tax added to them, while keeping their English quota with the old guard and young talents like Harvey Elliott. On the other hand, Manchester United is a perfect example of a club that repeatedly falls into the trap of overpaying the English tax. The transfers of Harry Maguire, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and to a lesser degree Jadon Sancho are brilliant examples of that. By the way, for Sancho I say to a lesser degree because I actually believe that he would eventually deliver, and we've seen what he's capable of in the past. By the way, is it just me, or Jadon Sancho really looks like the 7-Up mascot? Honestly, it only hit me when I was drawing him. And honestly, United's the kind of club that I would see chasing Declan Rice and potentially pay close to the full asking price, which is why it wasn't surprising to hear United's interest in Declan Rice in the past. And honestly, if these rumors are true, it just shows that United haven't learned from their past mistakes. And just like United, Manchester City spent a sizable sum on the transfers of English players like John Stones, Kyle Walker, Raheem Sterling, and most recently, Jack Grealish. And while the jury is still out on Jack Grealish, you can argue that they've had a much better success rate compared to United. That just shows that they're much better when it comes to the risk assessments of high-profile English transfers. Another factor to consider is that buying players from the teams in the same league just demands a higher premium, almost like a rival tax. After all, if your rivals want one of your players, why not charge them more? Oh, he's an English player too? Well, even better. Don't take it personally, that's just the nature of business. I think the Premier League is an interesting social experiment of giving everyone a lot of money and see what they're gonna do with it. Normally in these social experiments, you're gonna see many reckless spenders and many smart ones too. This is where you're gonna notice the competency or the lack of in the way people run their football club.